I'm Jason Harmon, and this is API Intersection, where you'll get insights from experienced API practitioners to learn best practices on things like API design, governance, identity, auth, versioning, and more. Welcome back to API Intersection. Sometimes I say, we're going to do something a little different today. Seems like the thing I always end up saying at the beginning of these. And I guess it's kind of true today. Still API stuff, though. So first off, I'd like to welcome our guest, Marjukka Niinioja. I think I got that right. Did I get it right?
Yeah.
All right. From Osango. She's a co-founder there. And I guess, tell us a little bit about yourself. My general sense is you guys do some sort of consulting stuff, but tell me more about what it means.
We do some sort of I think you've heard about APIs and consulting, but we actually do some API business consulting. So we end up doing a lot of architectural stuff too. And recently, information architecture auditing has been a trend for some reason. But APIs, API business models, API ecosystems, anything to do with APIs like IoT and a lot of AI stuff and things like that. And also training.
Got it. What's the typical customer look like for you? Perhaps in sort of size, scale, whatever.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question because when we set up the company, we kind of thought that the typical customer would be a SaaS company or something to do with software. And that was where we started. And one of our first customers was actually from US, Rev.com, which was kind of interesting. But then it started evolving. So we did a lot of public sector work. And nowadays we are doing a lot of building, construction, farming, and banking, and a variety of other things related stuff with actually really, really large global companies. So it's super interesting. And we're working as part of the API Collective, so we have friends and colleagues around the world, which is even more exciting.
Yeah, I feel like at Stoplight we've had kind of a recognition thing over the last couple of years that it's like it used to be if you're talking to somebody about APIs, it's some kind of, at its core, a software company. And these days it's like, our top customers sell beer and electrical parts and you got all kinds of just industrial stuff, right?
Yeah.
So it's easy to forget that APIs are everything, everywhere, all over the world now. So yeah, I feel like when I sometimes think in my head, like, what if I went and did consulting right now? It's like, man, you learn so much about so many different things that you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, exactly. I spent some funny times kind of using everything I knew about electricity and kind of like Faraday's gauges to how some big bulky electricity thingies work that are out there. so I mean, you really I need to know, but also learn about a lot of domains.
Yeah. You mentioned that a lot of folks are doing, I forget the phrase that you used, but sort of sounded like domain language audit or something.
Well, yeah, I mean, sometimes people are kind of, we are doing actually information architecture auditing.
Architecture, that's what you said.
But actually, it does touches the term domain, of course. But it's an interesting thing because we are partnering with some really great design companies, for example, when they are now designing these cool experiences and awesome visions. But then, of course, there is that reality check sometimes that you have to do. And in UX, you're used to having information architecture, but it means kind of how things are structured on the web page or taxonomies and things like this. So what terms are used? Now, you really need that kind of approach also with API design a lot of times, but actually you do need also kind of information architecture from the point of view of enterprise architecture kind of glasses. So there are lots of things that you actually need to tie these kind of tie all kinds of design activities, commercial design, UX design, different architecture designs around. And recently, actually, we've been working with a framework for kind of how to, this is going to sound funny, but how to purchase IoT platforms. Because the thing is that it's a domain of its on its own, but of course it's connected with different business domains. And everybody seems to have some kind of different ideas. What is an IoT platform and how it works? And of course, it does have also a lot of things to do with APIs. So I think that you could say that we and probably some others out there are also working in this kind of interface between different kind of roles and domains, but also different silos in the companies.
Yeah, certainly in my own experience, but heavily validated here on the podcast. It's been really fascinating to see how often people say, like, the hard part is this sort of alignment of language.
Yeah,
So we tend to, it's like you'll hear vocabulary or grammar or, different kind of ways to describe it.
yeah,
But ultimately, if you don't know how to talk about the things that you have, you can't design anything, much
yeah,
less the core functionality built into your backend services kind of spreads and leaks out everywhere. And if you don't get
exactly.
it right,
Yeah,
it's rough.
and
So,
I enjoy it because actually my background is I studied education in university, educational sciences, and also linguistic sciences,
mhm.
and it's really really interesting because you understand that what people say might mean totally different things to different people, but that's
Yeah.
not often what people kind of in the business context think. So they think if somebody uses some word, it must mean the same thing as I'm expecting it to mean. And that causes a lot of confusion. And that's actually why, I mean, we probably are going to talk about this method, APIOps cycles today, but I actually created that method originally to solve that problem because I found that the biggest problem was that people from like design or product or architecture or different parts of IT and developers, they were not just using different words or like the same words for different things. Like validation for a designer is a different thing than validation for a coder, just to
Hmm.
start. So, so not only they were using different words or same words, but they were having different methods and different ways of describing things, and it caused a ton of confusion or things just were not moving. So an average API developing team was just not as productive as it actually could be, and is not as productive as they could be because of these reasons.
Yeah, I was kind of snickering to myself over here, because I think of my past experiences with words like metadata. I have no idea what that word means anymore because
Yeah,
every domain wants to have a metadata thing, and every
yeah,
time it's a
I
different definition.
know.
The word's meaningless.
Yeah, yeah,
So I feel you on this one. It's funny. I think in some ways we should almost be talking about APIs in terms of their usage internally, perhaps in sort of microservices and other things, as almost
mm,
a communication tool,
yes.
almost more importantly than a technology tool.
Yeah, yeah, and but it only works if people kind of, well, I hate this conversation going into that kind of either taxonomy or glossary or whatever vocabulary discussion or domain models. I mean, that's one part of it, and yes, you can standardize it, but it's only one part of it. One thing is that it's kind of like it's not just talking, but it's like requesting from another team something that, you know, usually often need this thing. Can you make sure I always get this thing I want and I don't need to explain a lot of stuff? Like if you every day you wanted to have a cup of coffee from the nearby shop and you had to explain them in detail what kind of cup of coffee you want, that would be really really annoying. Instead, you go there and the guy there probably knows you already and gives you exactly, the right cup of coffee. So
Yeah.
that is the experience we want from the APIs, so that they
Well,
really
and I think
understand it.
perhaps something you're not explicitly saying, but is
Yeah.
implicit, is that having a customer-centric view of how you describe things,
Yes.
you're speaking in customer language is,
Yeah.
it's sort of an invisible level up for an organization to not have to quibble about the meaning of things, and when
Yeah.
you turn around and talk to the customer, you're not confusing them with things they've never heard of either.
Yeah, but actually, that's exactly the inbuilt thing into APIOps cycles. So, for example, today I've done a workshop with some Australian customers, and I just came here to record the podcast from a session with some students, university students. And in both sessions, we were using this canvas called Value Proposition, API Value Proposition Canvas from the APIOps cycles.
Mhm.
And all those canvases in it, but specifically that canvas, are meant for you to kind of interview or think from the customer perspective, from the API consumer's perspective, and then kind of map out the pains and gains and the needs, and then start thinking, okay, what kind of features we want to provide to these needs. Do we want to provide anything, or do we want to provide something else? And all the canvases, there's, for example, a data requirements canvas, which is meant to be a tool where people who don't necessarily know anything about APIs can just say, okay, these I think are the important terms or important words in this context. And these are the questions I would like to ask, for example, from the API. So the idea is that you can do a kind of basically the whole designing of the API interface, but also the business model and the kind of product market fit, and even find any reusable APIs or any new APIs that you're missing with those canvases without actually knowing anything or not very much technical stuff. And the insight from, for example, the Australian customer this morning was that we really should have had more business people in the group than we had, because then we could have really had the right conversation. And that's what we keep telling people, that you do not use these tools and these canvas and this method alone. This is not the, I'm an architect, I go to my kind of box there and I draw some diagrams and then I come out and everybody just magically understands what this thing is supposed to do. But it is a collaboration and communication tool, and it's a tool to get fighting and innovating around it. Like, what do we really, really want to do?
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely something, we've heard a lot of too, and I think we've seen it in practical trends, certainly with stoplight customers too, is that the sort of historical perspective is like APIs are designed by, or APIs are implemented by engineers as an implementation detail of some broader
Yeah.
thing, and that means that you end up with an engineered experience, as we call
Yes.
it, right? As opposed to what we keep seeing more and more of is like product managers and folks closer to
Yeah.
the business side are taking an elevated role in that API design
Yeah.
process. And really, the engineering folks are there to sort of call out those practical, real world constraints that might
Yeah.
hold you back from having the optimal model or something.
Yeah.
But the sort of locus of control of design of APIs, I
Exactly.
think, is changing in a good
Yeah,
way.
and it's kind of it's. I know this blows up some thinking that you have traditionally come to think, if you are an enterprise architect, information architect, or somebody, that if you have certain, like, let's say, accounts, products, or something, common, that you can actually have multiple different APIs for different, with different value props for different users and segments of API consumers using that same account, and it's still okay. It's not going to, destroy your data management or do something bad. But on the other hand, I loved it. We had a really kind of hectic session last week with a big energy company, and they were really kind of like, there was this whole business focused team thinking of what are we going to do with our APIs, and they were asking, well, like, as the last question, what API should we be building? And I'm like, okay, nice question after like 50 minutes of knowing you guys. but the really kind of right answer is like, look for problems. what are your customers and partners kind of complaining about? What are you complaining about? Those would be probably very good candidates to start with from a kind of design thinking mindset.
Yeah, it's for better or worse, I find that the process of people going, we need an API strategy, quite often sort of shines a light on the fact that there isn't a real business strategy and people are just being
Yes.
reactive.
Yeah.
And it can kind of lead into
Yeah.
like the API is just a tool to connect things. Like, what are you trying to accomplish as a business?
Exactly.
And I think for folks that lean into it, it really opens up all the right discussions. But quite often, that's where things go sideways early.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends who you are talking to, like who's your customer, who are you collaborating, because of course if the discussions are on the kind of wrong level of the organization or wrong part of the organization, and there is no way for that part of the organization to communicate about a potential change in business strategy, then it might be leading to problems. And we've seen that kind of happen in a few cases, but we try to avoid it. We try to make sure that doesn't happen. For example, before we start with new customers. But I was talking with a CIO, and he was really really great. But once he understood that we might need to talk to business about these APIs and the strategy around it, he was like, oh my god, but I can't, you know because if I buy you in, then that's going to create problems because I can't touch business. So
Yeah.
we should get rid of that problem somehow.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, that this probably is its own rabbit hole, but I think my
Yeah.
experience has been that a lot of times there's tremendous information compartmentalization and kind of a fear of overexposing business strategy that means that nobody really knows what it is.
Yes.
Which at some point, I feel
Yeah.
like, you go like, well, yeah, but if nobody knows, then does it really exist?
Exactly.
Yeah. So look, you've hinted. I think we talked to practitioner types. Working on a program at a specific product or company,
Mm.
and we hear this sort of thing, and you go, "Well, how do you do all this?" And I go, "Just get the right
Yeah.
people and get them in a room and a marker board, and you
Yeah.
figure it out." I think what I always enjoy about and there's frankly not a lot of sort of folks that do this sort of strategic API consulting. What I love
Mm.
is the once you've gone through that pain once, you want a repeatable method. You want something that
Yes.
guides people through it. And you've kind of hinted at this API ops cycles thing.
Yes.
So tell me more about it. I'm fascinated, actually.
Yeah, it kind of was born because I was having problems, or rather, I was being successful, but everybody kept asking me, "How did you guys do it?" And I was like, "I have no idea." And then I kind of pulled back, and I was like, okay, I'm supposed to be a master of education. I must be able to crack this stuff. And then I was like, okay, there are some people talking about like API business model canvas, but that's it. There's nothing around to it. And at the same time, we were actually doing a lot of product management related meetups and things like that. So I started thinking, okay, what are the things that businesses are using already? And what is the kind of methodology, and who are talking and using which methods? I was like, okay, if we can pull these together, like product management, designers, architects, developers, everybody who wants to make things more efficient, so lean, and lean was kind of connected anyway with DevOps and APIOps and everything. So it kind of turned out to be a method, and it's openly licensed, so anybody can use it. And and at first I was like, maybe this will work. We actually started trying it out with a big industrial company, and it kind of worked. So then it started just going around the world. But I thought that, well, maybe some people use it somewhere. Last year when I looked at the stats in December, I was like, oh my gosh, there are like companies around the like all the world using it. So good, but we also did a big overhaul. But what you can use it for is of course just designing one API or couple of APIs. That's totally fine. It leads you from the initial idea of an API to and kind of customer needs to the actual implementation, and then publishing the API and things like that. Originally, one of the reasons it was created was also I was in charge with quite big retail company and the API management platform enrollment there. And the problem was that everybody kept pushing invalid APIs. Like they were pretty horrible. They might even have done them according to some standards and tools, but they still didn't pass the validations. They didn't work. So we needed some checklist of like, this is what you should be doing. And so in the method, there's also this API audit checklist, which is quite versatile. You can use it if you're buying APIs or if you're building or designing APIs. And that's actually the most common thing that people are using from it. But you can also start building your API strategy using the method. So you just take a little bit of a more overview look and you scope an area of the business and you start using it. So for example, today we've just been using it for exactly that purpose with a client.
Yeah, what I was fascinated by is that I don't. It's funny because like these days people go, are you API first? Like, are you doing API first?
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
it's kind of like when Fowler came up with the microservices term. Is this a
yeah.
microservice? Never that. I don't know. Is it
Yeah,
micro enough?
Fowler had
Like,
some really
that was
good
like
stuff.
a 5-year discussion, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but sort of following the steps that are outlined here, I like that it's business first
yeah,
and using this sort of canvas, which, I mean, I don't know, for me, just like something like a Miro does a pretty good
yeah.
job at just, boxes and lines can go a long ways to getting basic alignment. But like, what does this sort of canvas look like in your optimum setup?
Well, it's basically very simple. So it has, first of all, there are several canvases. So there's a kind of set that you can follow and be happy. A lot of companies use this API value proposition canvas and then the business model canvas. Hot tip, do not just use the business model canvas. You will get much easier life if you start with the value prop canvas first.
Hmm.
And it's just, there are some simple guidelines and boxes, and there's a structure how you should do it, and there are detailed instructions for it. And there's even like in our Osango Academy, there's even a 2-hour course on how to use it with videos, me explaining the whole thing. So it's really kind of, it takes usually people first time maybe 1.5 hours to start with the value prop canvas because they need to get their head around it and understand the product thinking and a lot of other things. But once they've done it one time, it's usually like 30 minutes to 45 minutes with the next session. And it gets like faster and faster. So we've had university students who have never heard the word API before. And after they have been introduced to customer journeys and a few other things, they actually can make an API value prop canvas in 1 hour and come up with some really decent results out of it. So it's that easy.
Yeah, that's what's interesting too, is like you mentioned that you sort of had an educational background, and I
Yeah.
noticed you had kind of a lot of things pointing at sort of, student resources almost. So is this something that you've actually got sort of university connections going with?
Yeah, yeah. So we have already, like a couple of years back, we've been having this online course, which is actually free open university course in Osango Academy with a university from Finland, Introduction to API Economy. And then we have an Introduction to Data Economy with another university. And then this course that I was talking right now is actually more hands-on. So it's a remote course called Futudemy, which we actually set up with Cisco and a Finnish university. And also the introduction to API economy course was actually later funded more with by Kone, which is a Finnish originating elevator company globally, and they wanted to translate it into Mandarin, Chinese, and German because they wanted to educate their customers and partners, and those are also available for free.
Very cool. Um, going down the sort of, numbered list of things in this approach,
Mm,
and you had mentioned it earlier that the API audit was kind of a big thing. Um, certainly in my world of always trying to think about, design before implementation. It's like
yeah.
the sort of uh, design review process stuff is always front of mind. But this kind of reads like more of, you already have stuff and you need to understand what it
Oh,
is.
yeah. Well, we divided it actually in the new version to three parts. So there's like the first set, which is for the design. The thing is that a lot of people, especially developers, they don't think they make bad APIs
No,
until they
no.
see some list that says these are the things that a good API has. So and then again, the bigger the organization, the more likely it is that they have a ton of Confluence pages guiding how you should do beautiful APIs, and nobody reads them honestly because they don't know they should because they are making these nice APIs anyway. So the checklist was basically an attempt, which has worked quite nicely, to cut away 100 Confluence pages at first and actually get rid of design reviews. I'm sorry to say this.
Hmm.
But combined with your wonderful Stoplight, and this was not a paid commercial, but kind of like combined with the automation that you can get to review your APIs, with this kind of like these are the things that you actually need to think first and really design, and you can't really automate them. So with that, the checklist approach is quite powerful. And uh, and also some companies, our customers, but some others are also starting to do this kind of metrics around API design, for example, that how many good APIs we have, for example. So those kind of things like checklists and automated audits can help. But the automated audits can only help with like the open API or other kind of really fact-based things.
Yeah. I mean, by the way, I'm kind of with you as much as we are always like, if you're not doing some kind of design review,
Mm.
it's probably a bad thing. I think maybe what you're saying is like the nature of that review should be more, um, sort of, let's discuss the functionality and how it
Yeah,
fits in the bigger
yeah. Like, why
picture
are
and
you
all of that.
doing this API? Do you
Yeah.
even know,
It's like,
team? They
you know,
don't.
and especially with like Spectral and I
Yeah,
mean, even beyond Stoplight, like there's
yeah,
plenty of tools out there to take the boring stuff and automate it and don't talk about it, right?
yeah,
Just make it green.
yeah. Exactly.
Discuss it once, write a rule, and then never
Yeah,
talk about it again,
yeah.
right?
So the
So I
only
think as long as
reason,
design review is like
yeah,
existential, like why does this thing exist? How does it fit into the big
yes,
picture?
yeah.
As opposed to, it's supposed to be dashes here and not underscores.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah,
waste of
and
time.
the thing is, you can't have an intelligent discussion on the existential reason for the API if your team is really not in the right level of maturity to even, like if I told somebody an organization was spending like 2 hours with every iteration of every API, and everybody was really frustrated because the junior developers or developers who were not were newer to APIs, they came to the reviews and they were like, here's my API. And then they were first asked like all those existential discussions and questions, and they had no clue. And then when you look at their API design, it's like you don't have any status codes, you have this and this thing wrong. Like if I'm just looking for your first endpoint, why would somebody spend hours reviewing this stuff? Because you can immediately see that there's a lot of things missing because this junior doesn't yet necessarily know, or they have been doing some other kinds of APIs or some other kind of software. They aren't just new to APIs. So first solve that problem, then take them into next level. It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, basically.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that you broke down, like this notion of sort of review or readiness is different at each stage. So like there's sort of prototype, then design, and then production.
Yeah.
It's like you've got different level of concerns at those different stages. That makes a lot of sense in terms of being iterative and getting the important stuff up front, and then all the little niggly things when you get closer to production.
And it's kind of also the whole thing is an attempt to kind of have these lean principles in the method. So lean is of course a management method, but the DevOps thinking, Kanban, for example, is very much based on lean thinking, even if people wouldn't know that. But the thing is, you're trying to reduce waste. And this whole thing that I said about the design reviews, there was like a ton of waste because you were trying to review all the things from something that was not meeting even the first criteria. Why would you do that? But on the other hand, why would you even review the first things? Because you could take care of that the developers actually know what the first things are and that they concentrate on those. So there is this kind of concept of 8 wastes of lean that is being talked about a lot in lean management literature. And there are all these kinds of wastes that are usually related to either too much stuff being made or waiting time or people needing to kind of jump around to complete their tasks and very many other things. And this is kind of the point of the method. So how to reduce the jumping around, the waiting, the general lead time, so the time that it takes to complete things, an API, and also kind of reduce the time that people try to understand each other and try to understand the guidelines and things like that, and also kind of reducing the unskilled work in a way. So I think it really is, even though lean management might not be the developer kind of management book of the year, but I mean it's really an important concept because I mean customers or management or whoever is always complaining anyway that why are you taking this much time? Sometimes some teams take years to complete one API, honestly.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, it's funny. I spent a number of years in a manufacturing business and did like all the lean things, like read all the books, did all the
Mm.
management training, up to and including like Kaizen workshops,
Yeah.
right? Where you're standing around with stopwatches, recording pack time on how long it takes someone to pass a box to the
Yeah.
next person, right?
Yeah.
But when I think it instantly resonated for me, one, that it is a business centric set of
Yes.
concepts. That means you can engage folks outside of engineering, which is in a
Yeah.
lot of places the big first challenge. And two, that it's practical enough that if you went, hey, here's an example of what lean looks like, like in my experience, you go into the shipping department and it takes, X amount of time to get a box through the shipping department. And
Yeah.
if we can cut that down by 60%, then we've
Yeah.
made everyone more productive. They're wasting less time on menial tasks.
Exactly.
That's always going to resonate with developer types of, hey, we're incentivized to be lazy, right? Like make it easy for me.
Yeah, yeah, and everyone is bored waiting for the requirements that never come, or
Yeah.
an architect trying to explain, I have these boxes and arrows here, and then the developer is like, "Where's my sequence diagram or whatever it is? Or
Yeah.
why can't I just, use my notepad and design the API?" So I mean, there's a lot of waste time, but I've found that a lot of product managers, product owners, project managers, for example, are also kind of excited from that
Yeah.
point because they are uh, expected to deliver. And they can't
Yeah.
deliver if they don't even know what the team is supposed to do to
Yeah.
deliver.
Yeah. No, it makes sense though to apply that sense of look at the throughput of a whole system and
Mm.
find those sort of critical
Yeah,
the critical chain, right? Like what's the quite often it's like one or two steps in your overall process that are eating up all your throughput.
exactly.
So to look at the process of what does it take from the point that someone thinks they need an API and does it even fit into business strategy? Like all
Yeah,
those things can bog down before you even get into development. I mean, a lot of times API
exactly.
development's easy these days. There's so many good tools, but it's all
Yeah.
the stuff around it that eats everything up. So
Yeah, and it's actually funny that we've actually done, I mean, this would be a place for even some scientific research, but people actually, if they are given a task that, think of what APIs should we actually build based on this business case or whatever topic at hand, if they list at that moment the APIs that they think should be built, and if they look at the list of APIs that they should build after doing it with the value prop canvas and even just the value prop canvas, it actually is a very different list. I mean, of course, there's some similarities, but often it looks really different. And the biggest waste is that you build something that is big and beautiful, and has all the attributes and massive amount of endpoints or whatever, but it doesn't do what your consumers and partners and your colleagues and whatever are wanting you to do. And this is actually an interesting thing, because a lot of times our customers now are kind of either they are massive regulated companies who are used to delivering like really kind of slow motion software compared to the SaaS or kind of startup world. But the startups need to use the APIs provided by these big companies. And sometimes there are really complicated partnership relations, because you promised this feature for us 3 months ago or 3 years ago, and we still haven't received it. What gives? So there really needs to be this kind of a method, and we've had these kind of really good conversations and things around these kinds of problems with this method, because it makes sense to both parties, slightly for different reasons, but still the ability to deliver is the big thing.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes people want to slap me when I just tell them simply, like, one, don't forget it's a product, treat it like any other product, right? Do all the same homework. And two, this is a design exercise. And if
Yeah,
you just took a group of designers and said, here's my requirements, build it, they didn't do any research, they didn't talk to any customers, it's going to be subpar, right? And the same
yeah,
applies when you're designing this back end service that maybe no one's ever going to connect with externally,
yeah,
right? Like,
exactly. But
so,
the problem there is that a lot of times people that are designing APIs or are designing the architecture that has APIs are not product management professionals or
right.
service design or whatever it is. And that is actually the biggest hurdle sometimes with some people and some companies and some teams in starting to use the value prop canvas and other things in the APIOps cycles, because first you actually need to teach them what is the meaning of product management and product thinking.
Yeah, I've never specifically used like the value canvas thing, but I think the same sentiment applies as in these sort of workshop environments. I always tell folks, if we invited a group of customers, say a feedback forum or something like
Mm,
that, and we put this on the wall where they go, yes, that's my things, this makes
yeah,
sense, right? If you can't pass
exactly.
that test, then you're doing
Yeah,
it wrong.
yeah.
Yeah.
Validation is really important.
Cool. Well, I could do this all day, but people won't listen. Probably past about 10 minutes ago. We're probably overtime as it is for attention spans. But I really appreciate you bringing all this to us. And I definitely personally have not, I've seen this, but not paid attention. And now I'm like ready to dive in. So I really appreciate it.
Sounds really nice. Thank you for inviting me here.
No worries. Any other closing thoughts or sort of folks, things that you want to share with the listeners here?
Well, I think we basically said it all.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
You should just dive into all the material, maybe take a course or something. And by the
Yeah,
way, there is the 8 Ways of Lean ebook is in the Osango Academy too. You can
cool.
enroll there and download it.
Yeah, and as always, we'll have the blog post that accompanies this that has all the links in it. So be
Yeah.
sure to check that out. Thanks again, Marjukka, and really nice talking to you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you have a question you want to ask, look in the description of whichever platform you're viewing or listening on, and there should be a link there so you can go submit a question, and we'll do our best to find out the right answer for you.